All right, I think we'll get started. I was just thinking that if you show up at 9 o'clock in the morning on the last day of the conference and get here, then you want to be here. So grateful you're here. Grateful we can be together. Hopefully you've been as blessed with the conference as I know I have personally. I know Robbie was talking. I think talking about grumpy, coming here grumpy. I wasn't coming here grumpy, but I was sort of coming here. I had a lot going on, right? And so I just was like, I was almost getting on the plane, like, oh, do I really need to do this and everything else? And all of a sudden, you get here, and God's like, man, I got you right here. And so just grateful for that. And in some ways, right, the conference, maybe it's like this for you. It's in some ways it feels like, man, we just got here, right? And all of a sudden it's like over. But then I was texting with my daughter and wife in Chicago, and they're driving through snow to school right now, which is that's nuts. We're not ready for that. Come on. But in talking to them, it feels like it's been a long time too, being away and being here. So blessed to be together, and we're going to be talking about creating, right, a community outreach culture in your church. And I thought it might be helpful to know a little bit my context and where I come from. I've been around a little while, so I've had some different contexts over the years. But right now, currently, about 3.5 years ago, Pastor John Kelly and myself, he's the lead pastor, I'm the assistant pastor, we planted on the west side of Chicago in the Austin neighborhood. And so very exciting, could share a lot about how the Lord directed us specifically there. But we love Austin. There's some great things happening in Austin, but it's also a neighborhood probably heard about in the sense that it deals with violence and a lot of challenges with gangs and drugs and those kind of issues for sure in our neighborhood. And we were so excited that the Lord would open the door for us to go into Austin there on the west side. One great thing about where we're at too as well, though, is that just west of us is a city called Oak Park. And so maybe some of you know that, and that would be actually like a middle to upper class, middle class community right next to the west of us. And just to the south of us is Little Village, which if you're walking down the street, you actually would think you're in Mexico. So that's just down a ways from us. So we are in a very diverse area overall. And so we were really praying that the Lord would enable us to represent that. And so our church is focused on Austin and the neighborhood that God called us to there. But also our church represents the greater diversity that's in the area. And then God really is bringing us together to reach where we're at. And so that's the context of where I am. One of the great things about being there in Austin with my brother, my friend John Kelly, when we drive around our neighborhood, they always think we're cops. Because a black and a white guy together in our neighborhood, that's what that's got to be what it is. So that's a fun thing. So people sort of like, hey, why are you running away, right? And so it's a joy to be there. We're also meet in a public high school there, Michelle Clark High School, and that's been a great joy as well because the principal, when we came and said, hey, we got this crazy idea, we want to do a church in the school, he's like, fantastic. And he's like, I just got here to the school, 7 days ago. And God just brought him in right at the right time. And he came to our first Sunday service and he's never left. And so he's very much a part of the church. And we've been welcoming the family of the school. And so just really grateful for the context that God's put us in. But also I know out here, some of you I know, a lot of you I don't, you guys are in context. And so that's what we're going to be talking about here is not how you reach one specific context, but how you reach the context that God's placed you in, right? And so that's what we want to do is to really see the Lord help us to create a community outreach culture in our church because we believe that's what the Lord has for us. So let me just pray for that and then we'll get started. God, I thank you so much for the time this morning that we have together. Would you guide and direct it? Lord, there's a lot of things that we could cover, but Lord, we want to get to what it is that you have. And Lord, and just give some clarity to what we should be focused on. And Lord, as well, from your word and from what it is that you have for each and every one of us here and the churches that we represent. And so, Lord, we want to be making an impact for you. And so, God, we would just ask that you would enable us to do that, and that this time together, Lord, would just bear fruit. Just bear fruit, Lord, personally, and Lord, for the body of Jesus Christ. And we pray and ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Well, here's the first thing. When it comes to your church, having a culture of community outreach, you got to have the right mindset. It's got to be the right mindset. And so, man, usually when I'm teaching, preaching, I'm not the one controlling the slides. So if I get behind, please someone remind me. So here's the mindset we want to have as we focus, that God hasn't just given us a place to meet. Man, is this amazing facility or what? That we get to be in for this conference. So God hasn't just given Oakville this church building, but he's also placed Hope Church in this community. So it's not just a place to meet. He's actually placed you in a community intentionally. And I thought we'd go to Matthew chapter 5, verse 16. And, this is a very familiar passage. This is one thing that I always think, like, sometimes you read something like, oh, yeah, I'm very familiar with that verse, right? You can just see that up here. But sometimes, isn't that like you feel a little bit like, man, Lord, I don't want to get familiar with your word. I want it to be real. I want it to be true. I want it to be the power that it is. And so let's just read this together, and then we'll just break it down real quick. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. So that's 16. What does Jesus talk about in verses 13 through 15? There's two things that he highlights, that the church, he symbolizes the church. Salt and light, right? And what does he talk about with the salt? What is he emphasizing there? Yeah, it loses flavor, right? So how does the church lose its flavor? Its power. How it loses it is because it's not bringing the gospel, right, to its context. And the light, right, is being hidden under the lamp, right? And so you don't turn a light on, he says, and then hide it under cover. The reason why you turn a light on is so that it shines brightly. So that's the context for coming into this verse. In the same way, you see what I'm saying? Salt and light. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good works. And so here's two words we think about having a community outreach culture: before others. Your church, the people of your church, when I say the church, it's the people, right? The people should be being before others. What does that mean, before others? What does that look like? Openly? Yeah. There has to be like a relational exchange, right? Let your light shine before others. That means you have to be engaging people. It can't just be a program. It just can't be, hey, we've got something going on. You have to be before others. You have to be reaching out to your community. And so that's what it's saying here, that let your light shine before others. The church has to be being before others, engaging their community, that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. Well, that's the mindset, right? That we don't just have a building to meet in, but we've been placed in a community. Here's the next thing: mission. If we got that mindset, if we agree with that, here's the mission: that we'd equip the church to live out the gospel in your community. That's the mission, what we're engaged in, to equip the church to live out the gospel in your community. Ephesians 2:10. Let's read this together. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. See, the gospel is what has saved us, right? The gospel is what has saved us, but when it says we are his workmanship, the gospel is actually who we are now, right? Christ is at work in us. Christ in us, the hope of glory. We are his workmanship, so we are actually the living, breathing gospel. That is who we are as brothers and sisters in Christ. And so that is what God has called us to be, is to be his workmanship, but also that he has created good works for us to do. You see that here? And so just be thinking about that you individually God has prepared good works for you to do. And then us corporately as the church, as the body of Christ, God has created good works for your local church context to do. That there's no doubt about that. It's right here that he has given that to us. So if that's true, then what is it that we really need? If he's created good works for us to do, what do we need? We need to know them. We need to know what those are, right? We have to be clued into, Lord, what it is that you have for us to do in the community. It's not like, hey, we need to have some strategy to go reach Oakville, right? It's like, Lord, we're calling to you. What is it that you prepared our church to do at this time, at this place for us then, as I love that here, that we should walk in them, that we'd walk in the good works that God has called us to do. Here's the great thing about if you're going to be involved, whether you're a pastor or you're leader in your church, when it comes to this area, the two things that can come out of this is, first is you can't do nothing, right? God has prepared good works for you to do, so you have to do something. But here's the other thing is you can't do everything. You can't do everything. God has specific things for you to do. And so for me in our church, I have to say no a decent amount of times, right? Because there's going to be people that come and say, hey, we should be doing this thing. We should be doing that thing. And there's a lot of things out there, but there's other churches in the Austin neighborhood that are doing some amazing things. And so God has entrusted some of those things to other churches, but what is it he's entrusted to us? And so when you have a church that's sort of like out there doing everything and trying to, this thing and that thing, and it's sort of whatever, then it sort of like doesn't really become focused, and you're really not walking in God's ways. The power is, right, when we're walking God's ways together and be focused on what he's entrusted to us. And so hopefully that just sets the table of, man, this is what we should be about, right? Amen? And our church in getting after it and understanding that. So here's just the things that we'll focus on this time is really having a go focus, a no focus, and a show focus in our churches. First, the go, all right, is to engage your community. So we have a go focus. We're going to engage your community. No is to love your community. Got to love your community. The last thing in show is show Christ in your community. That is having the DNA of what the Lord would have for the church to be, to shine brightly for him. Hey, just again, I won't necessarily have you put hands up, but I just want you to think about this just real quick as it comes to your context. Just sort of want to rate your church and sort of where you're at, and just think about that. So here, would you give your church in reaching out to your community based on what we've been talking about right here? Would you give it a 9 or 10? You guys are killing it, right? You're just getting after it, and it's just like, man, the neighborhood's like, oh my goodness, here they come again, So that would be a 9 or 10, killing it. Here's 7 to 8. That it would be making it. Like your church is making it. We're doing some things and seeing some things happen, and we're getting after it. We're pretty good, but we got a ways to go. That would be a 7 to 8. A 5 to 6 would be it needs work. 5 to 6 would be, man, we need some work in this. Maybe there's a few things happening, few things going on, and we feel something's coming together. But man, we need a lot of work. And then anything below that would just be like, man, this just really isn't a priority for our church. This isn't really something we're getting after. And so just be thinking about that for yourself. Sort of where is your church at currently as you think about these things. I think we're at the making it stage in our church. So here's the first thing: go engage your community. Matthew 28:18 is go therefore and make disciples. Key word there, going. And here's just a statement I want to have us focus on is, and thinking about that, is establish a go-to-you focus versus just a come-to-us church culture. So when you think about your church, it is easy, right, to be satisfied with just come-to-us culture. Like, hey, we got, this program going on. We got a killer kids ministry here. Hey, when you come to our church, you'll be welcomed and people will love you and it'll be, that'll be great. So just come to us. Again, is that wrong? No, we want to be like, man, we want to be a church, right? That's doing those things. But is that all that the church is called to do? Is to get people to come to us? Right? We've got to be a go-to-you church. That's got to be part of our culture is, yeah, we're here, but we're getting beyond the walls. And we have to really fight to really get to that, right? Because it doesn't naturally happen. So often, that holy huddle, we're right here together. So we need to get to our people to have a go-to-you focus versus just a come-to-us focus. So here, the first way to sort of engage that, I just put down is proactive, not passive. Proactive, not passive. This is being strategic neighbors. So in the context of where your church is at, where you've been called to, you need to be proactive in your community. And man, I just, I find so often, you're, talking, I'm out in the neighborhood, and some people are like, man, I don't even know any churches in our neighborhood. I'm not even aware of anybody doing anything in our neighborhood, in our context. And right, shame on us, right? When the neighbors don't really know anything besides that we block traffic on Sunday mornings, and so we've got to be proactive. So here's just some ways of being a strategic neighbors. Here's the first thing is, what is your target area? At Chicago West Bible Church, we know exactly what our target area is, what we're focused on. And when something's happening in our community, we're trying to be aware of that, and we're trying to bring that to the attention of our church. Some of you probably have heard on the news, right, that there's a teacher strike in Chicago, right? And going into day 10 today, which is just crazy. So the last 2 Sundays, as part of the service, we're praying about the church, about the school strike, right? Because that's affecting children in our neighborhood, it's affecting families in our neighborhood. We have teachers in our church, right? The principal is administrator, so he's not actually part of the strike, but he's trying to manage with 150 kids in the school when there's no teachers. So if we're engaged in a community, we should be praying about that, right? We should be aware of that, and we should be and asking God, what can we do? How can we step in? And so we're praying about that right now, of how to helping our community during this time of the CPS strike, because we know what our target area is, and it's the Austin neighborhood. So what is your target area for your church? Here's the second thing. In that target area, what are your community demographics? So as you think about what that is, what your target is, what is the community like? Is our community older? Is it younger? What is it racially, right? What's it social economically? Where are there, are there pockets that social economically are totally different than others, or racially different than others, right? So what are the demographics of our community? Hey, there's a great resource called noplaceleft.net. Noplaceleft.net that helps mapping for churches. So if you're interested in how know more about demographics, I mean, you can go to anything in any city and get some demographics, which is helpful. But really mapping and having a strategy for reaching your neighborhood, I just would suggest that noplaceleft.net. Here's the next thing is, what are the most challenging issues in your community? Shouldn't we as the church, if God's placed us in our community, shouldn't we know what the greatest challenges are in our community? Praying for that. And this last thing that's helpful, I think, with that is what community connections are vital to make. So for our context in knowing the challenging issues, where is it that we need to go to make connections in our community to really know what's going on? And I think every community is different in that way. We have a lot of community service organizations in our neighborhood and contexts that we go to, but really getting after what are some community connections. The schools themselves are good places to go, but really what are the things we need to have so that we can be proactive, not passive, in our communities. That makes sense? All right. Hey, anytime you got a question or want some input, please, I'll open it up at different times, but please just put your hand up or just acknowledge that in some way. So here's the second thing. After being proactive, it's being participants, not consumers. Participants, not consumers. This is the whole thing of the power of presence, right? Too often, churches are actually consumers in their own communities, right? And not really engaged. So the first thing is to really know, they're going into our community, engaged in that, but then it's actually being participants. And so I think a lot of times we miss out on the power of presence. When someone's sick in the hospital and you're a leader in the church, you're a pastor in the church, it's one thing to text them, right? And say, hey, I hope you're getting better, praying for you. It's a whole different story to what? Visit, show up, be there at the side of the bed and be present, right? There's a power. You never get that back, right? Someone's at the hospital and you don't make it there. You don't get that back. And so that's the same thing here. It's power of presence of being in your community. So we can't go over, break these down too much overall, but these are just ways to be present in your community. Is there community service going on in your community? Sometimes there's park cleanups, right? And hey, the community's hey, we want to clean up a park or do some things. Churches should be involved and participate, not just consuming their community, but participants in making their community better. So a lot of ways. Even there's I know for us there's even ESL programs, and people can volunteer at ESL programs as a community service. And that's a great way to get to know people in your community by teaching English as a second language. It's another opportunity. Mentoring is another service opportunity. Here's next one, community initiatives. So things that are going on that way. There was a 5K in our community, and so we got very, very involved in that. And we had volunteers that were there. We brought a cheering section. We had people in our church run in the 5K or walk in the 5K and do that. And so again, it was our way of we're here too. We want to be connected in the community as well and to be known. It's the power of presence. Community engagement. Talk more about some specific ways to do that, but when I'm saying that here is thinking of specific ways for the first two are what's going on that you can connect with, but this one is what can you do to be more engaged in the community. And one thing we just did in our neighborhood is we go on prayer walks. So we just pick some specific areas to go to, and we meet together and we just walk around our neighborhood and we just pray and we talk to people that are out and engage them and follow up with them. And we had a senior citizen in our walk who was her door was falling off and she didn't know how to get it fixed. And so, hey, can we go do this? And so somebody came the next day and fixed her door. And so it's those kind of things. You don't even know the needs of your community until you're out in it. But ways that you can engage your community. Schools, Schools sometimes are looking for volunteers in different ways. That's a great way to be present in your community. And social service organizations that are doing good work in your community, whether they're secular or Christian, we're just trying to be present, right? So unless there's something you disagree with, against our beliefs, we could still be involved in that. So going and engaging your community is really important. Here's the next thing. Is you got to know to love your community. Got to know your community, to love your community. Titus 3:14 that's there is as our people must learn to engage in good deeds to meet pressing needs so that we won't be unfruitful. So it's saying our church, we must learn to engage in good deeds. So it's one of those things like we have to get after. And so here's the statement. You need to establish a love your neighbor focus versus just a love what we do church culture. So a little bit similar to before, but a different emphasis. Got to love your neighbor focus over a love what we do. That's, we all know this, right? Like, it's like, hey, when we come to Christ, we're here to follow him and to disciple. And so that's why we're here, is to reach those that are lost, right? And to love those that don't know the Lord, and to love our neighbors as ourselves is our call. And so often it can be like, man, we've got it taken care of here. We love what we do here. But man, we don't really have a love your neighbor and feel the burdens of our neighbors, right? What's difficult, for them. What is missing that's needed for our neighbors. And so a lot of times we're like, well, what do we need our parking lot taken care of? What do we need on our building? Well, what do our neighbors need? Love your neighbor versus love what we do. So here, just a couple things to focus on and getting after that. Here's exercise love for your neighbors. James 2:8 is the royal law, right? So here, just the thing is, this is not a duty. Like that's the thing of with our church culture. It's got to be that loving our neighbors isn't like, hey, I got to put on, this is my loving my neighbors time, right? So that's one of the things. Like, I'm not just talking to you about doing some more programs or some more outreaches. We'll talk about that, and I think there'll be some things. But it's talking about having a mindset of a lifestyle of loving your neighbors. And so getting our churches to be focused that this is a way of living out what God has called us to do, is exercising love for our neighbors intentionally. And here's the second thing with that, is go to know your community to love them. Go to know your community to love them. Oh, thank you. You got me. Got my back. All right. Oh, wait, I went too far. All right, there we go. You got to know your community, to love your community. Luke 19, anybody know the context of Luke 19? Talking about somebody about this. Zacchaeus. All right, so that's Zacchaeus. Again, we break that down, but what I love about Zacchaeus' story is what does Jesus do? Like, he's got to, he's calling out Zacchaeus, right? He's calling him out. But what does Jesus do with Zacchaeus before he talks to him about the situation? Yeah, calls him. You remember the song? Because I'm going to your house too, right? So Jesus actually engages Zacchaeus and goes to his house and goes right to him, and he sits down with Zacchaeus. He interacts with Zacchaeus. He takes time to know Zacchaeus. And then the loving thing for Zacchaeus is actually to bring the conviction on him for what he's done, right? But that's what I love, is Jesus was relational in engaging and going into the community. And so that's what we need to do, is you can't really love your community until you know your community. And so we got to get to know it. And so I just put down pursue some opportunities to know and love. if you got to know your community to love it, is to get out. We do, Summer Blast, Winter Fest. Those are events in the summertime in Chicago. We have this big sports field at the school, and we just put together a family festival, and we just invite the whole neighborhood. And the first year we did it just as our church, but then we've got to know some other churches, and we're like, hey, that are like-minded. Hey, why don't you join us, and let's just do something for our community. And so this year we had over 1,000 people come to this family festival in our community. So we're getting a chance to meet neighbors and to know them and to be able to hear their stories and where things are at. One of the ways that it makes it really significant is that actually we have a few churches that aren't from our context, but they come serve us by running all the games, because we have these big, we put up big jumpies and we have food and a lot of stuff going on. But then the churches that are there in the community, what we do is that we take the people that come in and we walk them around the festival. And if there's like a single mom with her kids, me and my wife, we'll spend 30 minutes getting to know her, finding out the age of her kids, what school they go to, hey, do they go to a church anywhere? Just really getting to know them and being with them during that time, offering to pray with them. And so what's really cool is during that time, you'll just see all these, huddles of people going around, and all of a sudden they'll be praying and doing that. And so it's just a way for us to get to know, right, our neighbors, so that we can love them and so that we can engage them. We do the same thing in the wintertime because, people get a little stir crazy in Chicago in February, right? And so we do it inside the school as well, and do that kind of thing. And so youth mentoring, ESL ministry, refugee ministry, outreach. I love Toronto because when I come here, it's like the most international city I've ever been in. Walk around, you're seeing people from all over. And that again, depending, no matter what your politics are or whatever, immigrants and refugees, God's bringing the world to us, right? And so, if God's bringing the world to us, go therefore and make disciples, we get to actually be in our community and going, reaching around the world. So any ways that you can do that. Food pantry, we do a really relational way of doing food pantry. Neighborhood, barbecues, like even you can do, encourage, we've done this before, actually in my suburban context that I was in, so I just wanted to highlight this, is we just encouraged everybody in our church to do a barbecue for their neighborhood. So everybody in your church get to know your neighbors, and especially if you live in the target area. So we just talked about that, right? So if you know your target area, let's get after that, and let's get as many people as we can to do barbecues in those areas so that we can actually get to know our neighbors there. And so that's another way, of doing that. Christmas store. It's another thing that we have with that. It's a way of providing for people for things at Christmas time that can be really challenging. But I just thought real quick, I just throw it out to people here. What are some of the things that you've known, that you've either experienced yourself or heard of ways that churches can reach out in their community? That'd be helpful for us just to hear about.
Instead of doing VBS at the church building, we had everyone in their neighborhood run VBS in their backyard.
Oh, that's great. Yep.
For their neighbors.
Yep. That's fantastic. Yeah. Cool. About how many people did that? How many? Do you know?
Well, we're teeny tiny. We're
Okay,
a year
sure.
old.
Oh, praise God. Yeah.
So we had 4.
That's great. Yeah. Any fruit from that?
We didn't have anybody come to the church, but that wasn't.
Yeah, but you got to know them, right?
We did. We
Yeah.
got to know them. We made a lot of relationships. Some kids got saved.
Yeah. Cool. Congratulations on Game 6, by the way. Just see that.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
All decked out now.
Yeah. George, I think, were you?
I was just going to say, within the mission of a church, hearing of churches that have had a presence, say, in the inner city, and just laundry for single moms, and come in and do their laundry for free, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Just touch points.
Yeah. And again, I think we all understand this. You want to do it in such a way that, hey, it's such like, hey, stand in this line and wait for your turn or whatever. Like, you have to make it relational when they're here. I'm sure that's what that is. But so often people are used, if they're needing resources, that they're just a number, right? And so if we can do something where we're providing a resource, but also they're not just a number, right? Yeah. But that's the heart of what we have to have as the church is giving every opportunity. And again, that's what I just said that's what I love is that God's prepared specific good works for your church, right? And so I like to hear other things because it stirs us up, but we're not going to be able to do everything that everybody else is doing. But what does the Lord have for us? But if we're getting after that and seeking after that, then we'll be walking in his ways. There'll be an opportunity at the end just to share a little bit in some groups. So I think that will be helpful as well. Any questions at this point? Thoughts at this point? Yes.
So in your context, how does your church decide, given a need, material need in your community, how do you all decide what to do and what not to do?
Yeah.
The process that you all go through, how does that happen?
Yeah, that's good. So what we do in our church is first is pray, right? So we don't really commit to anything till we say, hey, we really want to bring this to the Lord and to do that. So and maybe I haven't emphasized this as well, is your church isn't going to go anywhere with this if your leadership isn't on board. So it's got to be that the pastors, the elders in your church, there's a lot of weight on them. I know what it is, but hey, that's the job you signed up for, right? Like it's sort of like and so this has to be part of that. So Stephen, answering your question is that it isn't just like, oh, well, hey, our community outreach team, go talk to them and they'll do that, whatever. No, this comes to the elders of our church, right? And saying, now again, every little thing that we do, we're not, making a decision about every little thing that we do and how we do things, but hey, is this something that God's entrusted to us as a church? Shouldn't that be an elder thing at some level, in that way? And so that's what we do is say, hey, because again, we're just over 3 years in our church. And so we have really like 4 ways that we're focused on reaching our community because we don't want to go way wide and not go deep. And so right now, how we function in our church is we say, come to our elders and say, hey, we're praying. Is this what the Lord has for us? Then we have we have to be praying that the Lord would give us leadership for a ministry. So if someone comes with, hey, you should be doing this, well, it's sort of like, well, hey, we have to have somebody to be able to lead that. And so again, if we don't have the leader, then we have to be praying that God would provide for a leader. And then a leader also has to be equipped, right, to do that as well. And so sometimes the greatest thing for someone who feels like, hey, something really needs to happen is that they have to wait until the provision is made and for them to really see like, hey, it just doesn't happen like that, right? And so there needs to be a process for that. So that's why I said that but leadership really has to embrace this and really has to be part of that and celebrate what it is that we're doing in community. So in that way. So here's the last thing after knowing your community. It says word and deed ministry to your neighbors. And so that's a little bit what I was just focused on there of it really needs to be life on life, right? It needs to be relational. And so in everything that we do in that way. So here's the last main thing. So go, know, and here's the last one, show. Show Christ in your community. Show Christ in your community. 2 Corinthians 5:18 there is the word to be ambassadors for Christ, that we've been given the ministry of reconciliation and the message of reconciliation. And so if we're to do that, then here's the statement, is we have to establish a burden for the lost passion versus just a building our thing church culture. Establish a burden for the lost passion versus just a building our thing culture. And so that's our thing is, does our church have a burden for the lost? to the people that are walking down the halls of our church as they're getting together in small groups, community groups? Is there a burden for the lost? Are people carrying the weight of talking about people's eternities, right? And obviously, as individuals, we're put in a lot of different contexts, work and where we live, family, friends. But for our church, do we have a burden for the lost in our community that God has placed us in? And because the first thing is, the purpose has got to be love. That we truly, when we're saying we love our neighbors is to have this burden for them that they're lost, that they're blind, that they can't see. And one of the most helpful things for me personally for this was, you guys know the magicians Penn and Teller? So Teller's the big guy, right? Big tall guy, and Penn's the short guy. I mean, wait, no, it's the other way around. Yeah. Yes, you're right. So Teller is the short guy, and Penn is the big guy. So I don't know if you know this, but Penn is he's an atheist, and he blogs about it and does a lot of things, talking about how he doesn't believe in God. And but it's amazing. One of the strongest things for being communicating the gospel comes from somebody who's an atheist. So let me explain myself. Penn writes about a situation where they did a magic show, and afterwards, the line comes up afterwards, and they're all like, hey, how did you do that? When you sawed her in half or whatever, and so people are coming up, and so he's answering those kind of questions and stuff. And then this one guy comes up, and he says, dressed like a businessman, and starts to talk to him, and he says, yeah, I really enjoyed the show, but then he's like, then just starts sharing with him. I really feel like the Lord wanted me to share with you about Jesus Christ and what he's meant to me. And so Penn's like, oh my goodness. And he's like, doesn't this guy know? Like, yeah, I don't believe in this. But this guy's talking. But he says that as that was happening, he was like, he wanted to stop him, but he was feeling like, man, this guy is being really genuine right now, that he really cares. And so he's just sharing what it is that he cares about. And he said, it's sort of like, hey, we all have different things that we care about. And so it's sort of like, hey, sometimes you listen to somebody, what they care about, and that isn't, so he was just sort of like that. But then as he goes even a little further, as he was sharing, then it becomes true to me that he actually doesn't just care, he actually loves me. Like, he's sharing this because he really, isn't just like, hey, just doing his thing. Like this is a loving thing that he's doing. So, finally, he just tells him, hey, thanks for sharing. I don't really believe in that and, whatever, but just appreciate, you being here. And so he's writing about this at like 1 a.m. because he's reflecting on it. And he's like, man, I still feel compelled that this guy was actually doing the loving thing. But then this is what he says then after this point is he's like, man, he goes, I've got family, I've got friends that say they're Christians, that go to church and do other things. But he's like, but they've never shared with me what this stranger did, to me after the show. And he's like, man, that's really like confusing to me that, that, hey, others in my life, they say they believe in that. They wouldn't do that. And he's like, man, I can really only come to 2 conclusions about those people is either they're like hypocrites and they don't really believe what they say and that's just like something or whatever. Or 2 is that they must not really care about me, right? Either they're hypocrites and really don't believe that, or if they're really in my life, they must not care about me. Then he goes even a little further. Well, how much must they maybe not even love me that they wouldn't, if that's what they really believe, what he believes that, hey, if I get hit by a bus, I'm going to be lost for all of eternity and go to hell. How can someone really love me and believe that and not tell me? And it even goes even further. How much must they hate me? So again, as far as I know, every time I think about that, I pray for Penn, right? And so because it feels like, man, he's so whatever. But as far as I know, he never has. But it's sort of like, but he's got a reflection on the truth that if this is really who we are, the gospel is who we are, the truly loving thing to do is take every opportunity to know our neighbors, love them, and to share what it is that we have. Because if we don't, it's sort of like, hey, we're here, we're consuming the community, right? but we're not loving the community. And even as Penn said, dare I say, right? Maybe we don't even care. And in some levels, it could be true, like we hate our community. No, I don't think we really believe that, right? And feel that. But in some ways, right, if we just keep inside ourselves, right? And not truly do the loving thing of reaching where God has placed us. But that's the whole thing. It's love, right? Man, God, you love me so much. You gave up your son for me. Help me, help our church to have the love for our neighbors, the burden for the lost, and our desire to be representing Christ in every way, in every opportunity, in word and in deed, right? Full of your grace, full of your truth. That it's powerful, right? So much so that a man who doesn't believe was still moved by someone who was being loving to him in sharing that. Well, that's our purpose, is love. The next thing, our plan, is that we're ambassadors for Christ. Ambassadors for Christ. I love, some ways I love like politics. I love government stuff and, United Nations. Always, man, that'd be one of my things. I'd love to go to the United Nations someday. And but you know what? Every United Nations has ambassadors and all representing. So you guys all know this, right? That an ambassador represents their country, right? And they're actually the walking, living, breathing representation of their country. And so that is who we are, right? We're the walking, living representation of Christ. Wherever we go. And again, God's placed you in your community. And so that's the whole thing. It doesn't have to be rocket science, right? You just have to be ambassadors engaged in your community. So hopefully this is just an opportunity to be stirred in that way. Oh, thank you. Our plan, ambassadors for Christ. And here's the last thing within that is our process. Our process is a natural and intentional gospel focus. Natural and intentional gospel focus. Now, I know back in the day, actually when I went to Moody Bible Institute, undergrad. I heard a shout out there. I remember, as I was growing up and I was going there was a lot of fear of community outreach stuff, social engagement, because we've seen so many, right? So many organizations, so many churches get off the gospel, right? Drift away from what we believe in and what we're committed to, the faith. And so that has happened, right? And so that's true. But we don't have to live in fear, right? We shouldn't just give that mantle away of being social agents of change in our neighborhoods, right? In our communities, because some have gone adrift. This is why this is what was being so important, is that we have to, when our people go, we need to be natural and intentional gospel focused. And when I say natural, it's just being who you are. Know the gospel, what it is that you believed, what you believe in, who it is you are, and represent that, but also be intentional about it. So again, we don't need a well, here's our witness program, in that. I think, not that that's wrong, but I'm just saying what we want to do is release our people to be naturally representing the gospel and being intentional about getting out there and doing that in our communities. And so again, we do that in many different ways. One thing that we just did is, I know that, food pantries are a very common thing, and that's a great thing. And again, you could have community organizations that do food pantries in your community. That's a great way to serve your community and just be present by volunteering there and doing that. But one thing in our context of what we did for our food pantry was we just want to take it different at Thanksgiving time. It's coming around, but made me think of that. We just were like, man, we want to be more engaged with people that come to our food pantry to do that. So what we did was we decided that we were going to make Thanksgiving meals and bring it to the people. And so we had people sign up to receive a Thanksgiving meal, and then we sent our people out to go to them in their context, because so often they're just meeting you, where you're at, right? And wherever that place is at. And so, man, we had so much fruit from people just going and being there. And again, at Thanksgiving time, people are just more open, right? Just sort of hearing, and you say, hey, what do you guys do at Thanksgiving? And, what are some of the things, that you do as a family in your situation? You share, and it just was really helpful. But again, if our people are natural and intentional about the gospel focus, that just comes out in the conversation, right? Hey, this is what I've been learning. This is what God's been doing in my life, and just sharing a testimony. But first, again, with our people, you got to be there to know people first, right? It's got to be relational, to know them, to love them, and do that. So again, we don't have to worry about drift if that's what we're being about, is showing Christ in your community. Well, I want to have just at least a little bit of time for us to break up in groups, but any other input of best practices or things like that?
Okay. Do you guys have a process for evangelism in your church? And word of mouth and to
Yeah.
be part of this?
Yeah. So we do have evangelism training in our church, and so people can take that, and so we have on Sunday mornings where we do that. But part of that is then by the time we're done, you actually are involved in something that we do in the community. And so one of the things, these prayer walks that we do is a great way for people actually then to use what it is that they've been given in that way and do that. So you want to have people equipped to share the gospel. But again, the thing I'm wary of, and again, you can use tracts. You can, again, there's nothing right or wrong. We just want it to be as natural, right, as possible. So our evangelism isn't like, here's the way that you share the gospel. It's just what the gospel is. And then, I think many have used this before, but here's how you share the gospel. I was, but God, and now. I was before Christ was happening in my life. What was my situation, how I created. But God, how I came to Christ, what that actually means to me, how I chose Christ, but then and now what God's doing in my life. And so that's how, we focus on really, because we want the gospel to be integrated into your story. And your story is much less offensive than actually when you're just coming up and saying, hey, I got this track and I'm going to give this to you. Then someone feels like this is just a transaction, right? Sometimes. And so then you can still be true about the gospel, be bold with the gospel, but it's within your story in that way. So does that answer your question? All right.
And then how do you try for street evangelism?
Street evangelism?
How was that?
Yeah, so our street evangelism is basically, we call these like night walks that we go on. And so we go out into our community and do that. We just walk around and we offer to pray with people. We ask them, hey, what their situation is, and get to know them. And so that's how we do. We're in a very urban context, so there's lots of people out in the street, lots of people to engage. And so, our things it's just a 4-block radius. And so we're busy for 90 minutes for sure just in doing that. But depending on your situation, that might be different. But that's how we do that. So then we do that in different blocks in our neighborhood. But we also work with other churches in our in a community as well, and they're focused on different areas too. So we work in conjunction together.
Anybody has experience with suburban context?
For doing street evangelism?
Anybody around here? What's suburban?
Yeah. So not urban, right?
Neighborhoods.
Oh, suburban.
Neighborhoods around
Yeah.
the city that is mainly for the people who sleep, that drive to the city to actually work.
Yeah. Go ahead.
We did the 4th of July parade in our town, which is very suburban. And we did a booth where we read the Bible out loud for 72 hours. The entire Bible you can read out loud. And we did it with our youth group. So the youth are standing out there. I think they're a little less threatening. And then people would walk by the booth and we could engage them in conversation. And then we also did, this was, I can't remember, it was suggested by another ministry, but out in the community with like a parade or an event, we did spiritual surveys. We would just say, hey, we're with this church, and we're just taking a spiritual survey. What's your faith like, or what's your relationship with God like? And then we could engage them a little bit in the
Yeah.
gospel.
Yeah, we've done something very similar suburban context as well. So you go in to do that. Again, what I would just say, suburban context too is, sharing the gospel. You just got to be there, right? And so again, if you're living that out, is how can I engage the community? And if you're engaged in the community, then you're evangelizing. You're doing, exactly what we're seeking after. So, but again, if you can set up a booth and just put, a prayer booth, and people might just pull over. You put it out in a parking lot somewhere, get permission at like a strip mall to say, hey, we just want to pray with people. And you'd be amazed that people will pull up and say, hey, can you pray for me? So that's something as well that you can do. In our neighborhood, when we offer to pray with people, 90% of people receive it. Yeah.
Is it, you see, you've talked a lot about partnering with other churches. Is there a breaking point, methodologically, theologically, where you've had to say, can't work with you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, it depends on, the situation, like with what you're doing. So, for example, in our neighborhood, the police district, we have a faith-based, group that meets there that talks about the community and the situation and trying to make an impact. Again, there's churches there that we wouldn't, specifically align with. And, even for us, like sometimes, very prosperity gospel focused. And so we'd be wary of what they're actually doing in the community, but we're meeting together in that. But then when it's like, hey, we're going to do Summer Blast, then in our community for the families, we work with the churches that are like-minded, that, focus on the majors that we're focused on. So we still do some stuff in the neighborhood overall with some of these other churches because there's no reason to not, because it's a way for us to be present. But then when we have specific things where we're focused on sharing the gospel, then we work with the churches that God's led us to that are there. Yeah.
Just wondering on numbers, how many people in your church have actually embraced this kind of philosophy?
Yeah.
A lot of people don't.
Yeah. Don't do that. Here be the thing. Like my sister here, the best thing is when you're a church plant, like, if you make it a part of the DNA from the beginning, then what happens is, that's why I said, it's one of these things, like with your church, it's like, even our church is like really diverse. So sometimes people come in and they're like, man, I love this. Like I've been looking for it. And some people are like, oh, I'm not ready for this yet. Right. And so it's the same thing. Like we're a church that from the beginning has been committed. Again, we have a long way to go. So I'm not trying to represent, we got it all together, but it's been a part of what we are. So I think people that come to our church have actually maybe even heard that before they come to our church. And then when you're at our church, like that's what attracts and brings people in. So in some ways, that wouldn't be fair as compared to, another church that's been going for a long time and is trying to implement that. So, but I would say about 75% of our church has done something in our community in 2019 that's been out in the community for sure. So yeah, grateful for Lord's doing there. Got a ways to go, but yeah. But that's why I think everyone's in different stages. Here's what I would just say: if you're a church that you were, hey, when we did the survey or whatever, and you're sort of like, hey, 6 or below. The first thing I would suggest to you is that if you're not a pastor in elder leadership here, is that you meet with elder leadership, pastor leadership, and you say, hey, again, we all have strengths and weaknesses. Our church, we're trying to get a discipleship focus together, so we've got some weaknesses. But be like, hey, we just noticed we haven't really been community engaged, and we really, maybe feel like God's giving me a burden for that. Is that something we're considering? But until you get your pastoral elder leadership on board with that, then it's just going to be like self-interest groups that are out there, and so you're going to need to do that if that's your situation, if that isn't there yet. But
Yeah, that's just an excellent point. I think for those who have such a desire to see that happen, and that's a good desire, it's a right desire. But if your eldership is not on board with that, it's going to be a really frustrating process for those people who really have a good desire, but then don't see it happen within the church that they attend, and then bitterness sets in and that sort of stuff. So I just can't emphasize enough how much I agree with what you're saying. It's like,
yeah,
get as much as you can, get your local leadership on board, get their blessing to go out, but then be helpful and say, okay, here's how I'm willing to give my time then to see this happen, and here's the people that are also interested in this, and can we work together on that? Otherwise,
Yeah.
it becomes a really, by experience,
Yeah.
really frustrating process.
oh, I really appreciate that, brother. The one thing I've seen, and again, that's because and the world will know we're his disciples by how we love one another. So the enemy is always trying to divide us. Sometimes in churches, you get people passionate about doing this, and they don't feel like the leadership is coming along the way that they should, and they go do that themselves, and they invite people to join them, and it becomes even a greater divisiveness because, hey, the leadership isn't doing what we're supposed to be doing. So if you're here and that's like a burden and you feel like that isn't, then you go to leadership and you're just praying, God, would you enable our leadership to get on board with this? But don't go and do it on your own and, within the church, because that just isn't, just like in anything else, like it's got to happen, together. And so I think that's a great highlight. Yes?
Hi. So what happens if you started doing stuff with other people from other churches because you have a burden for the lost?
Oh,
So it's not within your local church, but you work alongside other brothers and sisters from other churches of like-minded, but you do evangelism.
yeah, just praise God. That's great. The only thing I would just be like is if that would be helpful for your church to be doing at some point or be involved in, that you could be a bridge to that. But I think that's great because, again, I know in our neighborhood, they're used to this, right? People out in the street are used to, hey, you've got to come to Mount Zion Baptist Church. Like, that's where you have to go, right? You have to come to Chicago West Bible. They're used to people saying that. But then when you're like, oh, well, hey, we have a group, here, and there's 3 different churches represented here, then it's not just like you have an agenda about your church. And so actually then the community is like, oh, this isn't just about. So I think in some ways that's very helpful. So, hey, and I know we're past the time. I was just going to encourage again, what I would just write down is, what's the best next step? What's the best next step for my church, my context for us to do? You can write that down now. You can be praying about that. But, how many of you have been to workshops, right? And you're like, you do multiple ones at a conference, and then you go back, and then it's sort of like a week later, you're like, okay, what workshop did I go to? And, and so if you can just come to like, hey, I'm going to do one thing to initiate this. I'm going to do, one thing. God, show me what that is. And then I had there on pray with each other. So if you have somebody here, you have time to do that, you can. But here's what I would do is, again, for accountability is, once you have clarity for that, share that with somebody else and ask them to pray with you about that. That will take it to the next level, is if you're like, okay, I believe the Lord's asked me to do this next step, and then I'm sharing it with somebody in the church, and we're going to pray about that together, that the Lord would help to see this, be brought to fruition.
I would love to share this with my team. Is there a way I could get a copy of this from you?
Oh, sure, yeah. Yeah, for sure. So, okay, get an email to me. Okay. My email is ksteiner, KSTEINER, it's really long, chiwestbiblechurch.org. Man, John, I'm like, John, why do we have to put our whole church name in the email address? So, chiwestbiblechurch.org, ksteiner at chiwestbiblechurch.org, CHI West